Welcome back to Audible Archives. I'm Rob, your host, guiding you into another mystery from the fog of Ashford. Tonight, a quiet estate hides whispers far louder than the storm outside. Threatening letters, midnight footsteps, and a family unraveling under unseen eyes. In the bungalow at Kingswell Road, fear is more than a shadow, it is a weapon. And Detective Drake Vane is here to unmask the hand that wields it. Before we begin, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because each case leads us deeper into Ashford's darkness.
The late afternoon sun slanted across Ashford's outskirts, casting long, twisting shadows over the narrow streets and crumbling brick buildings. Drake Vane's tram rattled along the rails, the familiar smell of coal smoke and damp stone filling the carriage. He clutched his notebook, eyes scanning the city's edges, absorbing the rhythm of its life. The traders unloading crates, the distant whistle of the furnace, the occasional shout of dockhands negotiating wages. It had been a quiet week in homicide, unusually so, and Drake had found himself restless. That was when the telegram arrived. Detective Vane, urgent matter at the Bungalow estate near Kingswell Road. Discreet inquiry required. Radcliffe and Company. Drake had read it twice. The note was vague, deliberately so, and that meant trouble. The sender, a legal firm known for handling delicate matters among Ashford's wealthier citizens, rarely summoned him without reason. Drake, thinking, discretion. A matter delicate enough to avoid the usual channels. And the bungalow, isolated enough for trouble to fester unseen. By the time Drake arrived, dusk was settling into the sky, turning the clouds into bruised purples and grays. The bungalow, perched on a slight rise and hidden by overgrown hedges, was a modest two-story structure, its white paint flaking in patches. A narrow driveway led to a small courtyard, where a single gas lamp flickered weakly. A man in a tailored coat approached as Drake stepped down from the carriage. He was tall, thin, with a hawkish nose and a nervous manner. "Man, Detective Vane, thank you for coming so promptly. I'm Mr. Halworth, solicitor for the estate. You understand, of course, this situation requires delicacy." Drake, I understand. And discretion comes standard with my services. I've seen far too many curious eyes ruin what could have remained contained. Halworth led Drake through the overgrown garden, the air rich with the smell of damp soil and decaying leaves. The bungalow's front door opened onto a small vestibule, cluttered with umbrellas and a faint trace of tobacco smoke. Halworth, the matter involves the family's eldest daughter, Miss Evelyn Darnell. Strange occurrences, threatening letters, and an incident last night which left us all quite unsettled. Drake, raising an eyebrow. Incident. Halworth. Yes, something that happened while the household slept. Nothing has been reported publicly, for obvious reasons. But the family insists, someone is watching, someone intends harm. Drake's steel-gray eyes swept over the interior, faded wallpaper, a ticking grandfather clock, and a faint chill that hinted at more than drafts. Drake, thinking, threats, secrecy, and a family afraid to speak out. Classic shadows in an isolated home. And most likely, someone among them, or very close to them. Before he could ask more, a voice called from the upper hallway. Evelyn Darnell, soft, anxious. "Mr. Vane? You've come." A young woman appeared, pale and slender, her dark hair falling loosely over her shoulders. Her eyes, wide and guarded, flicked toward her father, who stood just behind her. Drake, nodding politely, "Miss Darnell, I understand you've had some alarming experiences. I intend to learn exactly what, and from whom, without causing panic." The room was small but tastefully furnished, with a faint scent of lavender hanging in the air. Drake's gaze fell on subtle details. A chair slightly moved from its usual spot, a letter partially concealed under a cushion, and a faint scuff mark on the floor near the staircase. Drake, thinking observation is everything. The smallest deviation often tells the largest truth. As dusk deepened into night, Drake settled in the drawing room, setting his coat and notebook carefully aside. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, brushing against the bungalow's windows. Inside, the family spoke in hushed tones, sharing fragmented accounts of letters, noises, and fleeting shadows. Drake, to himself, someone intends to unsettle this household, and someone is clever enough to avoid detection, so far. But every trick leaves a trace, and I intend to find it. The candlelight flickered across Drake's face, casting shadows that mirrored the unseen danger creeping through the bungalow. For the first time, he sensed that this case would test not just his skill for deduction, but his ability to anticipate a mind that thrived in secrecy, deceit, and fear. As the night deepened, Drake listened to the subtle creaks of floorboards, the whisper of the wind, and the uneasy murmurs of those inside. He would not act rashly. Patience was a weapon, and tonight he would wield it fully. The first night at the bungalow had begun. Night had fully settled over the bungalow. The wind swirled through the hedges outside, carrying the distant sound of rustling leaves. Inside, Drake Vane moved quietly through the corridors, his notebook clutched in one hand, his steel-gray eyes scanning for the smallest irregularities. The Darnell family had retired for the evening, but their nervous energy lingered in the air. Drake had requested to examine the rooms individually, insisting that observation often revealed what words could not. The first room, Evelyn Darnell. Evelyn's bedroom was modest, yet refined. The scent of lavender mixed with the faint musk of old wood. Drake noted subtle signs. The bed slightly rumpled, though it had been made that morning. A folded piece of paper on the vanity, partially hidden beneath a brush. A faint smudge on the windowsill, as if someone had leaned against it in haste. Drake, thinking, small disturbances. Not accidental. Someone has entered or observed this room. He carefully unfolded the paper. It was a handwritten note, brief but alarming. Your safety is limited. Trust no one in the house. A friend. The ink was slightly smudged, the edges folded repeatedly. Drake's gaze lingered on the handwriting. He had seen variations before, someone deliberately attempting to mimic another style, or perhaps trying to appear careless. Drake, thinking, a warning designed to unsettle. Psychological manipulation before action. Investigating the common areas. Next, Drake moved to the drawing room and study, inspecting bookshelves, furniture placement, and fireplace logs. He noticed a faint footprint near the hearth, partially concealed by a rug. A book pulled slightly forward on the shelf. Recent disturbance. Candle wax residue on a side table, indicating someone had spent time here recently, perhaps hiding or reading. Drake paused. The bungalow was not merely a house, it was a stage, and someone had choreographed small movements to frighten or distract. The servants' quarters. Drake made his way to the servants' wing, quietly questioning a maid who had been with the family for years. Drake, have you noticed anything unusual in the past few nights? Guests, sounds, letters. Maid, nervously. Well, I hear footsteps, sir, at odd hours. Sometimes the doors creak when no one is near. And the letters. Oh, the letters, sir. They worry Miss Evelyn greatly. Drake nodded. Her fear was genuine, but she offered no false leads. Small details often carried more truth than frantic suspicion. Drake, thinking, the orchestrator is clever, leaving hints but avoiding detection. The pattern is deliberate, psychological games before any direct act. A strange visitor. Late in the night, a knock at the front door startled Drake. He approached silently, revolver holstered but ready. Outside stood a man in a dark overcoat, face partially obscured by the collar. Stranger, hesitant, Detective Vane? My name is Porter. I have information regarding the disturbances at this bungalow. Drake invited him in, noting his movements and tone. Porter spoke quietly, glancing around as if expecting to be overheard. Porter, I work in transport, deliveries around Ashford. Last week, I noticed someone making repeated visits to the bungalow late at night. They carried small parcels, always at the same window. I thought it strange. Drake, leaning forward, and you followed them? Porter, only briefly, enough to see they weren't servants. They always vanished before anyone could confront them. Drake's steel-gray eyes narrowed. Drake, thinking, not a casual observer, then. Someone with access or knowledge, careful, deliberate, and clever enough to avoid detection. A night of observation. Drake spent the remainder of the night quietly observing the bungalow, moving through the corridors, listening to the faint creaks and whispers of the old house. Every shadow, every subtle movement, told a story. By the time dawn broke, Drake had compiled a preliminary map. Evelyn Darnell's room had been accessed repeatedly. Common areas showed signs of recent disturbance. A visitor, possibly connected to the letters and threats, was circulating around the house. The family's servants were aware, but too afraid to intervene directly. Drake, thinking as he sat by the bay window, someone wants to unsettle this household, and someone is clever enough to remain unseen. Observation is key. Tomorrow, I begin speaking with the family in depth, and the first lies will surface. The first night at the bungalow had revealed patterns, fears, and small but telling inconsistencies. Drake Vane knew the real work was just beginning, unraveling the threads of manipulation before danger escalated further. The morning sun filtered weakly through the bungalow's thin curtains, painting the rooms in a dull, muted light. Drake Vane sat at the small writing desk in the study, meticulously reviewing the notes he had taken during the previous night's surveillance. Every movement, every scuff mark, every creased letter was catalogued. Drake, thinking observation is only the first step. Now comes the careful questioning. Words, hesitations, and contradictions reveal more than actions alone. Family interrogation begins. Drake first called Evelyn Darnell into the study. She appeared hesitant but curious, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. Drake, Miss Darnell, I understand the past few nights have been unsettling. I need to hear everything, no matter how trivial it may seem. Evelyn, very well. It began last week. Letters, strange noises. I thought it was a prank at first, but then I noticed things out of place. A chair moved, a drawer slightly open, books shifted on shelves, always when I wasn't there. Drake, and the letters? Were they signed? Evelyn, nodding, always a friend, but the handwriting changes slightly each time. Sometimes the ink smudges as if deliberately made to look careless. Drake's eyes narrowed. Drake, thinking, deliberate psychological manipulation. The perpetrator is testing fear, control, and attention to detail. Father and household staff. Next, Drake spoke with Evelyn's father, Mr. Darnell, a stern man with a tight jaw. Drake, Sir, have you noticed anything unusual? Guests, deliveries, unfamiliar movements. Mr. Darnell, nothing overt, but I have seen shadows in the garden at odd hours, and one servant seems nervous. I cannot place why. Drake filed this observation mentally. Fear and obedience often produce subtle tells, hesitation, quick glances, minor contradictions. The household staff were equally informative. The maid reported faint footsteps and whispered voices, while the butler admitted to seeing someone enter the garden late at night but could not identify them. Drake, thinking multiple observers, small disturbances, no obvious perpetrator. The pattern is calculated, designed to unsettle rather than act immediately. A mysterious visitor returns. Around midday, a discreet knock echoed in the study. Drake opened the door to find Porter, the delivery worker from last night, looking more anxious than before. "Porter, Detective Vane. I saw someone leaving the bungalow late last night, moving toward the nearby woods. They carried a small bundle, like the letters, perhaps." Drake, nodding, "Did you notice anything distinctive about them?" Porter, I couldn't see clearly. Tall, dark coat, hat pulled low, but their steps were careful, deliberate, practiced." Drake made a note, recognizing the pattern from his observations. The perpetrator moved like someone accustomed to avoiding notice, someone trained or meticulous. Drake, thinking, not a random intruder. Someone with purpose, patience, and knowledge of the house. Exploring the bungalow. With permission from Mr. Darnell, Drake examined the bungalow more thoroughly. Garden, subtle disturbances in the soil, indicating repeated visits. Windows, slight scratches on sills, smudges of dirt, faint traces of wax. Interior doors, latches slightly shifted, signs that someone had tested entry points carefully. Every mark, every minor irregularity, told a story to Drake. Drake, thinking, they are studying the household, mapping reactions, and exploiting the staff's obedience. This is a game of psychology before any act of violence. The first major inconsistency. While cross-referencing staff statements and family accounts, Drake noticed a critical inconsistency. One of the letters purportedly left by a friend had been folded differently from the others, and the smudge pattern suggested it had been placed intentionally in a drawer rather than slipped under a door. Drake, thinking, a deliberate staging. Someone is orchestrating events inside the house itself. This is an insider, or someone with free access. Evening observations. As night approached, Drake positioned himself strategically in the hallway overlooking the garden. The bungalow was silent, the wind brushing faintly against the windows. Moments later, a shadow moved along the garden path. Carefully, deliberately, someone approached a window near Evelyn's room, paused, and retreated. Drake noted every movement, every sound. Drake, thinking, patience. Every action leaves a trace. And tonight, we begin to collect proof. Night had draped the bungalow in a velvet darkness, broken only by the flickering light of gas lamps outside. Drake Vane moved silently through the corridors, his long coat brushing the polished wooden floor. Each creak, each faint whistle of wind through the hedges, was noted and catalogued in his mind. Tonight, patience would meet preparation. He intended to confirm the identity of the intruder and observe their methods firsthand. Preparing the trap. Drake began by leaving a letter in the exact style of a friend, carefully staged in the drawer he had previously noted. Its edges were slightly worn, ink smudged deliberately, and the folding mirrored the anomaly he had observed earlier. Drake, thinking, if the intruder is monitoring the household, they will not resist taking the bait. And in doing so, they will reveal their methods. He then instructed Samuel Keats and the staff to maintain normal routines. Any abnormal reaction would be noted discreetly, without arousing suspicion. The trap relied not on confrontation, but on observation. Stakeout. Drake positioned himself in the study, his vantage point overlooking the garden and the windows near Evelyn's room. The candlelight reflected off his brass watch, cracked hairline faintly visible, and his hands rested on the notebook, poised to record any movement. Hours passed. The wind whispered through the hedges, rustling leaves and stirring faint shadows. Drake remained still, unblinking, listening for the smallest anomaly. Drake, thinking, patience. Observation is the blade that cuts through deceit. The shadow appears. Shortly after midnight, Drake noticed movement near the garden path. A tall figure in a dark coat, hat pulled low, approached the window leading to Evelyn's room. The intruder paused, checking the surroundings, then slipped inside with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this exact entry countless times. Drake recorded every detail: posture, pace, gloved hands, and method of handling objects. Drake, thinking, not a random trespasser. This is deliberate, calculated, and familiar with the bungalow's interior. Confrontation deferred. Rather than confronting immediately, Drake allowed the intruder to examine the staged letter. They hesitated, checking for signs of observation. Then, with a swift, practiced motion, the letter was removed from the drawer, smoothed out and pocketed. Drake, thinking, evidence gathered. Movement traced. Now, to track without alerting them. The intruder retraced their steps, exiting the window silently, slipping back into the garden shadows. Gathering clues. Once the intruder disappeared, Drake inspected the drawer. His eyes caught subtle fingerprints, smudges in the ink, and faint traces of dirt that did not match any of the household staff. Drake, thinking, not a family member, nor a servant. Someone with access, and with knowledge of habits and schedules. Perhaps a guest, or someone who knows the family intimately. He also noted a small indentation on the drawer edge, as if the letter had been lifted with a tool, not fingers alone. Drake. Professional, or at least experienced, and deliberate. The game has escalated. Planning the next move. By dawn, Drake had formulated his next steps. 1. Identify all individuals with access to the bungalow, including recent guests and tradespeople. 2. Monitor deliveries and letters, ensuring nothing can be tampered with unnoticed. 3. Prepare a second staged scenario to elicit behavior that reveals intent. 4. Corroborate fingerprints and traces with careful observation of household members and visitors. Drake, thinking as he sat by the bay window, the intruder is clever, but not infallible. Every calculated action leaves a trace, and every pattern can be anticipated. Tomorrow, the net tightens. The morning light fell weakly over the bungalow, casting pale shadows through the dust-speckled windows. Drake Vane sat in the study, notebook open, his steel-gray eyes scanning his observations from the previous night. The intruder's movements had been deliberate, controlled, and professional. Now, it was time to dig deeper, into the family, the staff, and the hidden corridors of the bungalow. Interrogation and observation. Drake began by speaking to the household staff individually. He noted subtle differences in body language, hesitation, and verbal slips. Maid, softly, nervously, I heard noises near the garden window, sir. But I thought it was only the wind. Drake, calmly, and yet, the window shows signs of recent use? Maid, eyes widening, I suppose, yes. But I didn't see anyone, sir. I was afraid. Drake noted the fear, but also the subtle contradiction. She knew more than she admitted. The butler was more formal, guarded in speech, yet a slight tension in his jaw betrayed knowledge he had not disclosed fully. Drake, thinking fear can hide truth, but nervous habits reveal it. Someone here is withholding information, willingly or under duress. Family dynamics. Drake then turned to the family. Evelyn remained tense but cooperative. Drake. Miss Darnell, these letters, do you suspect anyone in particular? Evelyn, shaking her head, I don't know. Father's old friend, perhaps. But he's trustworthy. Or the gardener. I don't know anyone else who might. Drake's eyes narrowed slightly. The vagueness was natural, but certain omissions, the gardener, tradespeople, and recent visitors, hinted at someone with intimate knowledge of household routines. Mr. Darnell, despite his sternness, revealed more under subtle questioning. A guest had visited recently, leaving behind parcels and speaking quietly to the family. Drake, thinking a guest with access. Someone the family trusts, or at least does not scrutinize closely. A perfect cover. Tracing the intruder's path, Drake examined the bungalow's exterior and surrounding grounds. Footprints near the garden led toward a small path that connected to the woods. He noted disturbed soil along the hedges, slight indentations on window sills, small flecks of soot or ash near the chimney. Drake, thinking the intruder knows the layout, the schedules, and the weak points. This is premeditated, not spontaneous. Uncovering hidden motives. By late afternoon, Drake focused on correspondence and letters the family had received over the past weeks. Most were mundane bills, invitations, but one set stood out. Several letters addressed to Evelyn, always signed "A Friend," with subtle threats and requests. Drake analyzed the handwriting, paper quality, and ink type. Drake, thinking deliberate variation. A calculated psychological effect. And the sender is clever enough to know the family's habits, enough to anticipate who reads the letters first and where they are likely to be found. He noted small clues, a smudge in the ink that suggested hurried writing, a fold pattern repeated across multiple letters, and traces of a wax seal used inconsistently. Drake, thinking someone familiar with the household routines. Someone who can move unnoticed. And someone who intends fear before action. Setting the stage for confrontation. Drake decided it was time to escalate observation. He instructed the staff. Maintain normal routines, no abrupt changes. Record any unusual movement or delivery. Avoid confronting the intruder directly. He then prepared a second staged scenario, a letter deliberately left in an unexpected place, visible but enticing enough for the intruder to approach. Drake, thinking this time, I will observe every action, every hesitation. The intruder cannot resist temptation, and when they act, they will leave a trace I can follow. Evening watch. As darkness fell, Drake positioned himself in the upper hallway, vantage over the drawing room and garden windows. The bungalow was silent, the wind carrying the faint creak of branches against walls. Moments later, a shadow moved in the garden, approaching the new staged letter. Drake's heart rate remained steady, eyes fixed. The intruder paused, checking surroundings as if anticipating observation, then reached for the letter. Drake, thinking, perfect. Now we see their intent, method, and perhaps identity. The first part of the trap had succeeded. The intruder was about to take the bait. Night had fully claimed the bungalow. Shadows pooled in the corners of the rooms, stretching along corridors and under furniture. Drake Vane stood in the upper hallway, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the garden below. The staged letter lay under the old oak tree, deliberately placed in the open, yet tempting enough for the intruder to approach. The intruder approaches. Drake watched silently as the shadow moved through the garden, cautious and deliberate. Each step was measured, betraying experience in avoiding notice. The figure paused beneath the oak tree, gloved hands hovering over the letter, as if sensing the trap. Drake, thinking, this is no ordinary thief, no casual mischief. Every hesitation, every step, is calculated. Finally, the figure lifted the letter, unfolding it carefully, inspecting it. Drake observed every subtle movement, the slight tension in the shoulders, the eyes scanning for hidden observers, and the methodical way the letter was tucked into a coat pocket. Drake, thinking evidence of intent, precision, and knowledge. Whoever this is, they understand the household intimately. The pursuit. The intruder did not leave immediately. Instead, they retraced a path along the hedges, testing windows and doors, as if confirming the house's vulnerabilities. Drake followed silently, notebook open, recording each nuance. Footsteps avoiding loose gravel. Gloved hands brushing against hedges to avoid leaving fingerprints. Pauses near windows to gauge potential surveillance. Drake realized this was a professional, or at least someone trained in careful movement. Cornering the shadow. Using the interior corridors and side passages, Drake moved to intercept the intruder near the back entrance. The shadow froze, clearly aware someone was near, and a tense standoff ensued. Drake, calm, low voice, "I wouldn't move if I were you." The intruder's hands went to the coat pocket, brushing against the letter. A faint sigh betrayed panic. Drake, stepping closer, measured pace. It's not too late to explain. No need for rashness. Every action you take has already left a trace. The shadow hesitated, then turned abruptly, fleeing through a side gate. Drake pursued, but only managed to catch a glimpse. A tall figure, hat low, vanishing into the woods beyond the property line. Evidence recovered. Drake returned to the staged letter, examining it under lamplight. Fingerprints and traces of soot on the envelope suggested the intruder had handled small fires in previous visits, perhaps as a distraction or for psychological effect. Drake, thinking, not just letters. They manipulate perception, fear, and routine. This is someone who understands control, patience, and the weight of secrecy. Analyzing the motive. Back inside the bungalow, Drake cross-referenced previous disturbances with the latest evidence. He began mapping potential suspects. Household staff, nervous, but with no clear access to the outside paths. Family members, too visible and scrutinized. Guests, one recent visitor had sufficient access and opportunity, but motives remained unclear. Drake, thinking, the goal is not theft. The goal is to unsettle, to manipulate. And someone close enough to the household is exploiting fear as a weapon. Planning the next step. Drake decided that confrontation alone would not suffice. He needed 1. Documentation. Carefully record every trace and action of the intruder. 2. Predictive observation. Anticipate their next move using prior patterns. 3. Controlled exposure. Force the intruder into a situation where identity and motive would be revealed. Drake, thinking as he returned to the drawing room, they will act again, and next time, they will not leave unnoticed. Every shadow has a source, and patience reveals it. The following morning, Drake Vane returned to the bungalow with renewed focus. The intruder had left traces of movement, but had vanished before identification could be confirmed. Now, it was time to narrow the suspects, analyze motives, and anticipate the next act. Re-examining the household. Drake called the family together in the drawing room. Evelyn Darnell, her father, and the household staff sat tensely, eyes flicking toward one another. Drake's calm presence contrasted sharply with the unease in the room. Drake, I am not here to accuse anyone without cause. But patterns have emerged, actions that cannot be ignored. Someone in proximity to this house is orchestrating the disturbances. Someone with access, knowledge, and intent. He paused, letting his gaze sweep the room slowly, reading micro-expressions and subtle cues. Drake, thinking, the nervous glances, hesitation in speech, and involuntary gestures. The truth hides in what they try to conceal. Subtle interrogation. Drake began asking carefully layered questions, observing reactions. Drake, who has recently delivered parcels, visited late at night, or seemed unusually interested in household routines. The staff exchanged glances. A young maid shifted in her chair, hands gripping her apron. Drake, gently, I notice your discomfort. Please, your honesty is the only safeguard here. Maid, hesitant, I saw someone. Lady Margaret's cousin, Mr. Alastair Fenwick, arriving late in the evening. He had reasons to be around the house often, but I didn't think much of it. Drake's eyes narrowed. He had suspected a visitor with access. Now, a name had surfaced. Drake, thinking Alastair Fenwick. Close to the family, trusted, yet capable of movement without scrutiny. The pattern fits. Mapping motives. Drake considered Fenwick's potential reasons for these actions. Financial or inheritance disputes. Personal jealousy or obsession. Manipulation for leverage over Evelyn or her father. Psychological experimentation to test fear. He meticulously charted timelines, cross-referencing Fenwick's known movements with disturbances and letters. Drake, thinking everything aligns. But motive alone is insufficient. We need evidence, actions that betray intent without question. Preparing a second trap. Drake devised a more sophisticated staged scenario. 1. A second letter, slightly different from prior notes, placed conspicuously in the study. 2. A subtle auditory cue, faint tapping from the hallway, to lure the intruder. 3. Strategic positioning of himself to observe from multiple angles, including concealed vantage points outside the study windows. Drake, thinking, this time, hesitation will be punished by exposure. Their methodical nature will betray them. Nightfall, anticipating the intruder. As darkness descended, the bungalow settled into a tense quiet. The wind whispered through the garden, brushing against hedges and trees. Drake positioned himself in the study's corner, observing the staged letter, while another vantage point by the side corridor allowed him to catch anyone approaching from the outside. Minutes stretched. Then, a shadow moved near the study window. Drake noted precise, careful steps, gloved hands reaching for the letter, pauses as if measuring the risk of detection. Drake, thinking, this is it. Every movement confirms the pattern, deliberate, practiced, and close to the family. The intruder's first mistake. As the figure lifted the letter, a slight slip, foot on loose gravel, gave away their position. Drake observed the reaction. A flicker of panic, a glance toward the hallway, and an instinctive retreat toward the corridor. Drake, thinking, they are clever, but no one is infallible. The net tightens. Drake followed silently, careful not to be seen. Every action of the intruder was documented, noting height, gait, and clothing details, setting the stage for confrontation. By midnight, Drake had the intruder traced to a side entrance. He now had enough evidence to force a decisive confrontation, but he knew caution was essential. A misstep could allow them to vanish again. Drake, thinking, tomorrow, we end the guessing. The intruder will either act under observation, revealing intent, or reveal themselves through desperation. Night had fallen heavily over the bungalow, the moon casting pale light through the tall windows and painting long shadows along the corridors. Drake Vane moved silently, his steel-gray eyes tracking the subtle shifts in the house's atmosphere. Every creak of floorboards, every sigh of wind through the hedges was catalogued in his mind. Tonight, patience would meet resolution. The stage is set. Drake had positioned himself strategically, concealed in the side corridor, giving him a direct line of sight to the study window. Another vantage point near the garden, tracking potential escape routes. The staged letter placed openly on the study desk, deliberately inviting the intruder to act. Drake, thinking every movement will betray intent. Every hesitation reveals character. They cannot resist, and tonight, discretion will end. The intruder appears. A shadow slid across the garden, cautious and deliberate, approaching the study window. Drake observed every step, noting the precise way the figure avoided loose gravel, the gloved hands brushing against the windowsill, testing for obstacles. A slight pause, the head tilting as if listening for signs of observation. Drake, thinking a practiced intruder, not desperate, not reckless. They believe control is still theirs. Soon, they will learn otherwise. The figure opened the window and slipped inside, moving toward the desk with measured steps. Drake remained unseen, recording every subtle movement and preparing for the critical moment. The first mistake. As the intruder lifted the letter, a faint shift of the desk chair betrayed a miscalculation. Drake noted slight hesitation, as if surprised by unseen presence. Quick scanning of the surroundings, eyes darting toward potential vantage points. A brief glance toward the corridor where Drake was concealed. Drake, thinking they are careful, but caution alone cannot prevent exposure. The pattern is consistent, predictable. Confrontation initiated. Drake stepped from the shadows, his low, steady voice cutting through the room. Drake, I believe you have been busy tonight, and I know precisely why. The intruder froze, a slight gasp escaping. Drake's steel-gray eyes locked on them, unyielding. Intruder, stammering, I can explain. It's not what it seems. Drake, calmly, measured everything you've done has left traces. Every letter, every step, every hesitation. Your intentions are clear. Fear, manipulation, control. Now, the truth comes to light. The reveal. The intruder's composure cracked. Slowly, deliberately, they lowered their head and removed the hat, revealing Alistair Fenwick, the cousin of Evelyn Darnell. Fenwick, defeated, voice trembling, yes, it was me. I didn't intend harm. Only to frighten them, to test boundaries, to show who held power in this house. Drake, studying him, a dangerous experiment, Mr. Fenwick. You underestimated the consequences of playing with fear and secrecy. You manipulated letters, orchestrated intrusions, and relied on trust to mask your actions. But even careful steps leave traces. Motive explored. Drake pressed further, noting Fenwick's hesitation and attempts to deflect blame. Drake. Why, Mr. Fenwick? Fear alone? Financial leverage? Personal vendetta? Fenwick, finally admitting a mixture, jealousy, opportunity, and curiosity. The family trusts me. I knew I could move unseen, test their reactions. I never intended Raul harm, only control. Drake's expression remained calm, but his mind catalogued every nuance. The way Fenwick's eyes flickered, the tension in his shoulders, the subtle dishonesty in half-spoken truths. Drake, thinking motives are rarely singular. Human psychology is layered. Jealousy, greed, curiosity, pride, all converging in a single, reckless act. Securing the intruder. Drake calmly guided Fenwick to a chair, ensuring he could not flee or destroy evidence. He then secured the staged letters and documented every trace left behind in the study and garden. Drake, to himself, control regained. Evidence preserved. Motive and method exposed. The family can now reclaim safety without ambiguity. Resolution for Part 8. By midnight, Fenwick was detained, and Drake ensured the household understood the sequence of events. The staged letters, disturbances, and intrusions were carefully explained, allowing Evelyn and her father to process the threat they had unknowingly lived with. Drake, thinking as he left the bungalow, fear can be a weapon, but it leaves a path, and every path leads to the truth. Patience, observation, and careful orchestration reveal what lies hidden in shadows. The first rays of dawn touched the bungalow, casting a soft golden glow across the white-painted walls and overgrown garden. Drake Vane remained on site, seated at the study desk, notebook open. The intruder, Alastair Fenwick, was securely confined in a spare room under discreet guard, but Drake knew the case was not yet fully resolved. Disturbances, though explained, often left hidden threads behind. Examining psychological residue, Drake began by walking through the bungalow, noting the lingering unease in the household. Evelyn Darnell and her father were attempting normal routines, but subtle signs of fear remained. A drawer left slightly ajar. Hesitant glances toward windows. Staff avoiding certain corridors. Drake, thinking fear leaves impressions longer than footsteps. Psychological manipulation alters perception. Even when the actor is exposed, the shadow remains. He decided to address these residual effects directly with the family. Drake, Mr. Darnell, Miss Evelyn, fear was the instrument here. The intruder sought control without confrontation. Understanding the pattern of manipulation allows us to reclaim agency. Evelyn, nodding slowly, it's difficult to feel safe again after knowing someone so close could orchestrate this. Drake, calmly, acknowledging the truth is the first step. Observation and understanding restore control faster than ignorance or denial. Hidden threads in the correspondence. Drake returned to the letters, staged and genuine. He examined subtle details previously overlooked. Slight variations in handwriting that suggested multiple attempts to disguise natural penmanship. Wax residue that did not match any domestic seals, implying external influence. Tiny flecks of ash that indicated small fires may have been used to mislead observers. Drake, thinking Fenwick acted within the house, yes, but he relied on external knowledge, perhaps from someone who delivered correspondence or had access to documents. There may be accomplices or informants. Staff interviews revisited. Drake conducted a second round of private interviews with the household staff, carefully listening for unspoken details. Maid. I didn't tell before, but last week I noticed someone outside the hedge, watching the windows. I thought it was Fenwick, but maybe not. Butler, deliveries were sometimes peculiar, letters arriving late at night. Some had unusual ink or paper. I didn't think much, assumed business matters. Drake catalogued each comment. They confirmed Fenwick's manipulations, but suggested the possibility of an auxiliary observer or indirect support. Drake, thinking even small oversights leave openings. Fenwick may not have acted entirely alone in exploiting the household routines. Mapping movements and timelines. Drake reconstructed every movement from the past week. Fenwick's visits, timing, and the specific windows used for access. The garden paths taken during nocturnal movements. Correspondence deliveries, noting discrepancies in ink, folding patterns, and seals. Drake, thinking every action has a pattern, and every pattern reveals intent. But some anomalies suggest minor interventions, someone feeding information, perhaps unwittingly, or aiding access indirectly. A subtle threat uncovered. While analyzing Fenwick's letters and traces, Drake discovered a previously unnoticed reference to an estate business, a clause in recent correspondence mentioning a minor inheritance stipulation. It suggested a financial motive layered beneath Fenwick's psychological manipulation. Drake, thinking fear and control were the surface. Beneath lies potential gain, money, status, or leverage over the Darnells. This explains the precision, the patience, and the careful avoidance of direct confrontation. Consolidating evidence. Drake organized his notes. 1. Fenwick's motives: jealousy, curiosity, and minor financial incentive. 2. Psychological methods: staged letters, nighttime intrusions, subtle manipulations. 3. Residual fears in the household: staff nervousness, altered routines, and unease near windows. 4. Potential auxiliary influence: subtle hints suggesting indirect support or observation by unknown parties. Drake, thinking as he looked out the bay window, the case is largely resolved, yet some threads remain, minor, but illuminating. Even resolved incidents carry shadows that linger. Understanding them ensures the household can truly recover. The bungalow hummed with a deceptive calm. Morning light slanted across polished floors and faded rugs, yet the tension from previous nights lingered in every corner. Drake Vane moved deliberately through the rooms, observing, noting, cataloging, the calm before the final unweaving of the web. Reconstructing the intrusions. Drake spent the early hours tracing every known intrusion. Windows Fenwick had used. Garden paths taken during nighttime. Drawers, letters, and objects moved or disturbed. Every footprint, fingerprint, and trace of ash was documented meticulously. Drake lined them on a timeline against Fenwick's movements and known interactions with the staff. Drake, thinking, the sequence is precise. Psychological terror first, indirect pressure second, then the subtle suggestion of control. Fenwick orchestrated fear with mathematical precision. Addressing the auxiliary threads. The minor anomalies Drake had noted, the odd wax, slight irregularities in letters, distant observations by the staff, required scrutiny. He revisited the maid and butler, asking pointed questions about deliveries, visits, and unusual observations. Maid, there were letters. Yes, sometimes delivered late, sometimes handled oddly. I thought nothing. But now, looking back, I see Fenwick may have had guidance. Drake, thinking not an accomplice perhaps, but someone feeding small information indirectly, deliberate or unwitting. Minor support, but enough to amplify psychological effect. Cross-examining Fenwick. Drake returned to Fenwick, now confined, to confront him with inconsistencies and external evidence. Drake: Mr. Fenwick, I've documented every intrusion, every letter, and every movement. Your careful planning is evident, but small details betray you. Wax, ash, fingerprints, and indirect help. Explain the full scope. Fenwick, visibly shaken, I didn't realize. Those letters might be traced. I didn't act alone in every minor detail, but the intent was mine. I just wanted to scare, to assert presence, to test reactions. Drake's gaze remained unwavering. Drake, intent alone is dangerous when coupled with opportunity and knowledge. You manipulated, threatened, and tested limits. But the chain is complete. Evidence speaks louder than excuses. Securing evidence. Drake collected all letters, mapped footprints, traced ash residue, and cataloged all interactions. Every piece was cross-referenced to the timeline he had created. 1. Fenwick's direct intrusions. 2. Psychological manipulation through letters and staged movements. 3. Residual staff involvement or unwitting contribution. 4. Motive, jealousy, curiosity, minor financial gain. By mid-afternoon, Drake had a complete dossier ready to present to authorities. Drake, thinking the network of fear, though delicate, has left a trail. Every shadow has a source, every manipulation leaves evidence, and every motive leaves a fingerprint on reality. Preparing the household. Before finalizing the case with authorities, Drake addressed the Darnells and staff. Drake, Fenwick's actions are exposed, and the evidence is complete. But the after-effects of fear linger. Awareness, vigilance, and rational understanding are required to restore the household's equilibrium. He offered guidance for securing the bungalow, reinforcing windows and doors, tracking letters and deliveries, re-establishing normal routines gradually. Evelyn Darnell, relieved but thoughtful, "It feels strange to reclaim our home after the fear. Yet, understanding the why and how helps." Drake, nodding, "Fear is powerful, but clarity is stronger. Knowledge restores control faster than brute measures." The calm before resolution. As the family began to resume normal routines, Drake sat by the bay window, watching the garden where shadows had once crept. Every trace of Fenwick's manipulations remained recorded, every anomaly documented. Drake, thinking, the house is calm, but vigilance is eternal. Those who exploit trust leave shadows longer than footsteps. And every case leaves lessons etched in both stone and mind. Evening fell over the bungalow, bathing the walls and garden in the soft amber glow of gas lamps. Drake Vane had spent the day meticulously organizing evidence, reconstructing events for both the authorities and the Darnell family. Now, the time had come to close the chapter on Fenwick's manipulations and restore order to the household. Presenting the case. Detective Vane arranged a meeting in the drawing room with Mr. Darnell, Evelyn, and the household staff, alongside a representative from the local constabulary. "Drake, this evening I will present the complete sequence of events. Every intrusion, every letter, every movement, and every motive has been documented. Understanding the full picture will ensure the household can reclaim its sense of safety." He spread out a timeline, photographs of footprints, copies of letters, and annotated maps of the bungalow and garden paths. Drake, Fenwick's actions were deliberate, psychological, and meticulous. His motives combined personal jealousy, curiosity, and financial incentive. He manipulated trust and fear, moving precisely within the household and exploiting routines without causing immediate harm. Yet the threat was real, and the evidence irrefutable. The family responds. Evelyn, listening intently, clutched her father's arm. "Evelyn, so, everything we feared, everything that seemed random, it was all orchestrated by him?" Drake, nodding, "Yes. Every subtle noise, every letter, every perceived anomaly was carefully calculated. The intruder's goal was control, not confrontation, yet it left a tangible path for anyone observant enough to follow." Mr. Darnell, usually stern, let a deep breath escape. "Mr. Darnell, and we were blind to it, but you've shown us the truth, detective. That is a relief and a burden all at once." Finalizing evidence. Drake presented all material to the constable, explaining the methodical patterns, inconsistencies, and minor auxiliary threads, traces of indirect influence or unwitting support that helped Fenwick maintain control. Drake, the evidence leaves no ambiguity. Fenwick's identity, methods, and motives are fully documented. The minor anomalies, while seemingly trivial, illustrate the full scope of psychological manipulation he employed. The constable nodded, impressed by the meticulous work. "Constable, this will ensure a strong case for prosecution. Fenwick's pattern of psychological control, coupled with repeated intrusion, makes this far more than a simple trespass." Restoring the household. With Fenwick securely detained and the evidence compiled, Drake turned to the family and staff. "Drake, now comes the most important step, restoring confidence. Fear, once introduced, lingers longer than footprints. Gradual resumption of normal routines, attention to security, and understanding the methods used will allow you to reclaim your home fully. He advised, reinforcing entry points, carefully tracking letters and deliveries, encouraging open communication among household members, observing and documenting any further anomalies. Evelyn, relieved, smiling faintly, I feel safer knowing the truth and that we are prepared. Drake, safety is a combination of preparation and awareness. Knowledge diminishes fear faster than any lock or bolt. The shadow lingers, yet fades. As night fully settled, Drake walked the garden once more. The traces of Fenwick's movements, footprints, disturbed soil, subtle ash, were now recorded, analyzed, and understood. The shadows that had once haunted the bungalow were no longer mysterious, and the household could finally breathe without apprehension. Drake, thinking, the intruder has been unmasked. Fear's web dismantled. Yet lessons remain. Trust, vigilance, and observation are perpetual. Every shadow has a source, and every deception leaves its mark. The bungalow had returned to a calm that felt almost unnatural after the tension of recent days. Gas lamps flickered in the evening breeze, casting dancing shadows across the polished wooden floors. Drake Vane stood at the bay window, watching the last traces of sunlight fade from the garden where shadows had once crept. Fenwick was in custody, evidence complete, and the household's sense of security restored. Tying up loose threads. Before leaving the bungalow, Drake revisited each corner, each room, ensuring that every hidden detail of the case had been addressed. Letters, mapped and analyzed. Footprints and garden paths documented. Residual psychological impact on staff and family discussed and mitigated. Minor auxiliary threads noted and clarified. Drake, thinking every loose end tied, every shadow traced. The fear has been dismantled, and knowledge has restored control. But even resolved cases leave lessons that echo beyond the immediate threat. A final conversation with the family. Evelyn approached Drake, her expression thoughtful yet relieved. Evelyn, Detective, I don't know how to thank you. It's not just the fear he caused, but the uncertainty, never knowing when he would act. Drake, calmly, measured, understanding the why and the how is the only antidote to fear. Once patterns are revealed, shadows lose their power. Vigilance and awareness are your allies now. Mr. Darnell nodded, his usual stern demeanor softened. Mr. Darnell, you've not only solved the mystery, Mr. Vane, but restored our sense of control. That is a rare skill indeed. Drake simply inclined his head, the weight of observation, patience, and methodical action behind his quiet presence. Fenwick's fate. Drake briefly reviewed Fenwick's file one last time before handing it to the authorities. Identity confirmed. Motives and psychological manipulation documented. Evidence of intrusion and indirect assistance noted. Recommendations for prosecution clearly detailed. Drake, thinking justice will now follow due course. Motive, method, and opportunity all aligned to ensure accountability. The household can reclaim its sanctuary, and Fenwick's influence is finally curtailed. Reflections on fear and observation. Standing alone in the quiet bungalow, Drake contemplated the nature of the case. Fear had been the tool, subtle yet powerful. Observation and patience were the antidotes. Human motives were layered, curiosity, jealousy, and ambition intertwining in ways that could not be ignored. Drake, thinking every shadow has a source, and every deception leaves a trail. Understanding both is the only way to prevent fear from controlling life. He glanced at the bay window, the garden beyond now calm, bathed in moonlight. The bungalow, once a theater of uncertainty, now stood secure, its secrets revealed, its shadows accounted for. Departure and continuation. Drake packed his coat and notebook, preparing to leave the bungalow behind. The case was closed, the intruder revealed, the family safe. Yet the city of Ashford, with its hidden alleys, industrial shadows, and restless streets, still called. Drake, thinking as he stepped into the evening, Ashford does not sleep, and its stories never end. Another shadow will rise, another mystery will unfold. Patience, observation, and calm reasoning will always remain the tools of those who seek truth. He walked away from the bungalow, disappearing into the foggy streets of the city, ready for the next call, the next case, and the next shadow waiting to be traced.
You've just listened to The Bungalow at Kingswell Road, written by Raul for Audible Archives. Tonight, Drake Vane exposed the truth, a cousin who turned trust into terror, weaving fear through shadows until it consumed the household. But in Ashford, one solved case is never the end. There are always more secrets waiting in the fog, more truths buried beneath the streets. If this story held you in suspense, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support keeps these shadows alive. Until the next mystery, stay vigilant, stay curious, and stay listening.
Another chapter closes, but the archives remain, waiting for the next seeker of stories. Here, no voice is lost, no tale truly ends. This is Audible Archives. Until we meet again, may your mind wander freely and your heart never forget the stories we share.